confirm that we're on live?
We are live. So, hello, and thank you all very much for joining us. Welcome to today's Alumni Education webinar, Managing Mega Projects, which will be presented by Professor Yael Grushka-Cockayne. This webinar is brought to you by the Office of Engagement, and I am Jen Oliver, the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement here at Darden, and this webinar presents our continuing efforts to provide educational content to our alums worldwide. We will begin momentarily, but I just need to go over a few logistical details. You'll notice on your screen the chat feature. You can use this tool to type in questions during the webinar. Feel free to send a question at any time. You don't need to wait until a question and answer period. You can also unmute your microphones to ask a question with audio, but in the meantime, please make sure that all of your microphones are set to mute. Now, please allow me to introduce our presenter. Yael is an associate professor of business administration, and her research focuses on data science, forecasting, project management, behavioral decision making. She teaches core decision analysis and electives on project management and data science, in addition to the open enrollment courses, the Women's Leadership Program, and project management for executives that you'll hear more about later. She's received multiple accolades from institutions and publications across the world, and we appreciate having her time today. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you for organizing this. First, it's always great to get to know new alums who are out there, and this is one way for us to speed up that process. I don't travel around the country as much as I would like to, and I don't always get a chance to meet you face-to-face, so this is a way for me to get to know you. People are joining, so I'm going to kind of draw my intro and make it a little bit long so we can give some folks a few more minutes to get settled. But not only is it great to get an opportunity to get to know new alums that I'm not familiar with, it's also great to have a chance to see some names that I am familiar with, some students of mine who have graduated, who are doing great things. So I see TJ there. Hi. It's nice to see your videos. I see Missy's online, and I see some other names that I recognize. Travis is here, which is always really heartwarming for me to have a chance to be in a room, so to speak, with my alums, spending some time talking about project management. So really, I thank you for taking this opportunity and joining us today. Let's do the following. This is a Darden alumni session. So all of you are familiar with what we do here, and you know that it's not going to be a lecture of mine for the next 60 minutes, okay? I hope that you know that and that are expecting to talk up a little bit, even if it is virtually. So let's have a practice, and here's somebody kind of either raise their hand using the Adobe kind of system. If they figure out how to raise their hand, there's a little kind of hand-raising button opportunity that you can experiment with. Or you can just unmute Peter. Great demonstration. Peter has raised his hand. Peter, can you say hi or introduce yourself so we get to hear your voice as well? We're going to work on it. We're going to practice. It's going to take a few minutes, but let's see if Peter can say hello to us and join in. Hey, okay, he typed it into the chat. That's great. You can also unmute. Okay, that's fine if he doesn't get to work. Can somebody else just try to experiment to see if we have any voice coming through? It's just somebody.
Hey there, this is Ryan Rayborn. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ryan, thank you. Ryan, did I catch your name correctly?
Yep, you got it.
Okay, fantastic, Ryan. Thank you so much. Hopefully it's easy enough for you to unmute and mute. Because I'm going to ask you guys questions, and I've already started by asking you a question over email, and I've received quite a few responses. But I'm also going to ask you to chime into the conversation and the webinar, either via the chat, so you can type in your response, or you can unmute and you can join when I kind of open it up to questions. Because I would like this to be a dialogue. I want to learn from your experiences. I want to learn from your questions, and I want you to learn from each other even more than from me, in a very typical Darden classroom sense. So I thought I would just start off by introducing myself a little bit. Jen gave thank you, a very good summary of who I am. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but since quite a few of you our alums that I haven't met before, I just wanted to know, you to know a little bit more about me. So we become familiar with each other, and you can feel free to reach out to me in the future if you have any questions around the areas of my expertise, and that you're not a stranger when you do come on grounds to maybe recruit some of our students or to give kind of talks in some classes. So who am I? Let me bring back my mouse here. Who am I? So this is a picture of me, but my background is really varied. I was born here in the States, but I grew up in Israel, and I spent all of my childhood years in Israel, including my high school years, and then I did my military service for 3 years. And after I did that, I kind of looked to study something. So in my Army, during my military service, I served in an ordnance division, and I served in somewhat of a logistics role, but I also served in a role that allowed me to plan operations. It allowed me specifically to plan the operations around a tank division and the maintenance of a tank division. And I basically spent my day in a room not that bigger than this with Gantt charts all along the walls. And I fell in love with this idea that processes can be optimized, can be planned. There's some math and logistics, some mathematical concepts and statistics that you can use in order to optimize those processes. And when I finished with my military service, I went to study industrial engineering and management to kind of try and pick up on that theme and really perfect the way that organizations and processes get done and run. That I did in Israel still in Ben-Gurion University. After 4 years of doing industrial engineering and management, I decided that I wanted to experiment with what was then the height of the IT revolution in the Silicon Valley. People were gearing up towards the year 2000, and they were nervous about their ERP systems. This might all start to sound familiar to some folks. And I decided to go ahead and work in the Silicon Valley with selling enterprise resource planning, ERP systems, and I did that for a couple of years. And it really allowed me to capitalize on all of my studies until that point, to think about organizations and the flow of a process, to help them understand where the decision-making is done, and to also understand how projects get done in the context of an organization and what support they need to be executed properly. I realized that there was a lack of support for the managerial level while I was selling ERP systems, in the sense that they didn't have full transparency into their projects. And I wrote a proposal to go back to school to do my dissertation in that area, how to utilize resources better in a project environment. And so then I moved to London, and I spent 7 years in London studying for my master's and my PhD. I did my master's at the London School of Economics and my PhD at the London Business School. And after 7 years of studying and writing my thesis, I was ready to teach. I was really excited about the idea of teaching, and what better place to come to than Darden. During my recruitment process, it was very obvious to me that Darden is a very different beast in how it thinks about academic careers and teaching and research and the marriage between them. And here I'm allowed to really indulge in both of those activities. I quite literally indulge in my work with the students. I love to interact with them. I spend my time thinking a lot about the classroom environment and how they can get the most out of it. And I hope bring in some concepts from my research and inform my research from my teaching in order to keep both of those streams of my work. And so really my areas of expertise in which I do both teaching and research are two: project management, which you may have seen the theme in my background, but also decision analysis, which is broader, it's more generic. Most of you have taken a course called decision analysis. Some of you might have been here during the time that it was called QA, quantitative analysis. Can I have a raise of hands of who took such a course? Do you all remember that course? Everybody remembers DA, QA, with whatever? Good, lots of hands raised. I love it. Okay, fantastic. So you all have had some exposure to this here at Darden. Whether with myself, with Sherwood Fry, depending how long ago we look at the course, Robert Carraway, Casey, Sam Bodley, Phil Pfeiffer. Those are some of the suspects that you may have seen in the classroom teaching our core decision analysis course. So I moved here in 2009. This is my 8th academic year here, and I really have been teaching these two topics since then. Project management is a second-year elective that I started offering about I guess 4 years ago. This year I've actually added to my teaching, and I teach also decision data science. I'm laughing because somebody typed in the chat window, are you saying that we're getting old? Some of us are getting old. No, we're maturing with time and improving, so no offense there. Yeah, so this year I've started to teach data science, which is a whole other beast, and we can talk about that at a different webinar. Okay, that's a lot of talking on my part. Hopefully that gave you a sense of who I am and my background and what I do here at Darden. And today we're really going to focus on that project management topic, and specifically we're going to talk about mega projects. We're going to define mega projects. We're going to spend some time understanding the nuances, but that's all ahead of us and yet to come. Who are you? Well, you see the numbers are still adding up, but this is a little bit of a profile. Hopefully you can see the histogram that I put up on the slide. This is a little bit of the distribution of graduating class. So this is when you completed Darden. We have a big lump of folks, recent alums from the recent years, some of which I know, not all of which were in my classroom. I was glad to see students from my first few years here who were here during the time that I didn't offer project management, so now they can come back and learn some of that. But I was so impressed by just the sheer number of years and how far back we go, just to say that we have a great variety of students and graduating years in the room, a healthy sign from our alumni body, and hopefully this also makes you feel like you're part of a really solid, good family that show up to events when you need them. And there's a lot of interest to help each other grow and us grow together as a community. There's some guests that have joined us, and I welcome those guests. If you're here as a guest, I hope you like what you see and you get to know Darden a little bit better. Okay, so a few of you, there are a handful that I think took my course, and I expect you to be extra aware and alert. So if I cold call you, you'll be ready to go with some answers, okay? So let's start our talk for today. And I'm going to start talking about project performance, okay? This really doesn't surprise anybody when we start seeing headlines in the newspaper. This is already old, but I could have brought some new ones from the 2016 Olympics around delays or cost issues, or even facilities for the Olympics that are never going to open on time. Okay, so this was a headline, for instance, in London from 2012, that the cost of the Olympic pool triples. We see these headlines all the time. And just to give you a sense of how many times you may have seen these, look at the headlines that you may see just related to Olympic events. Okay, these are a type of project. Olympic event is a project. Montreal, the budget is almost 12 times the original stated budget. Athens, the Olympic group delayed. I don't know if you recall, but around the time of the Athens Olympics in 2004, there was a real concern that they would never open. They would never actually be able to host it on time. Let's see some more. Salt Lake City, 2.5 times the original budget. Olympic venue in Vancouver also was running over budget, and so on and so forth. And if you think about the recent events in Brazil, well, the world was just holding its breath to see what happened when that when the opening ceremony took place, and throughout the 3 weeks or just under 3 weeks of events, to see if everything was going to run as smoothly as they hoped, with a lot of kind of concern and expectation that it wouldn't. And so this is just to say that there is a big skepticism in general, and this talk is probably going to confirm some of that around project performance. Nobody was really surprised. Let me show you some more statistics around the Olympics, specifically around project performance of the Olympics, okay? If we look historically over the years, there have been many studies, especially out of Oxford University, that have documented overruns of the Olympic Games. Okay, so as you can see, if we look from left to right, we're seeing here over time what happens. We notice a few trends. We notice, for instance, a growth in the budget, just a clear, escalation of the budget that is being spent, and it grows over time. What about the overruns? Well, here are some overruns, okay? Any trends? Anybody notices any trends in the Olympics over the years? What do you notice in this chart, or what do you find interesting in this chart? The color is the continent in which it takes place. The size of the bubble is the degree of the overrun, and then you have your x-axis, which is the timeline. Okay? Anybody notice anything interesting here? Garrett is typing. You can also speak up if your mic works. You can also just feel free to join us and just talk. Almost every year has had overruns. Exactly. Almost every year has had overruns, okay? This is astounding. Every time we plan an Olympics, and this is going to happen every 2 years, winter, summer, there's going to be overruns. More overruns in the earlier years, perhaps, I think we're hearing here, so higher percentage of overruns early on, okay? But what about those percentage towards the end? I'm going to just wait until some folks okay, so there's a recent outlier in 2014. Yes, that the Winter Olympics was a high percentage of overruns compared to recent years, where it seems like the overruns were less catastrophic. But let's remember, this is 51% overrun of a project that is already $4.6 billion. Okay. And so we're talking here about magnitudes, and maybe the original budget here was much smaller, but the implications of the overrun, whether it's small now but larger earlier on, the implications are huge. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars here of overruns. I see some other remarks here, larger overruns in the Americas, so South America. In fact, last year, or this year's Olympics in the summer was the first time that a country in South America hosted the Summer Olympics, so that was a big deal. And so some would argue that a 51% overrun is not too bad for a country like Brazil. But let's just understand what that implies. 51% overrun for a country like Brazil could be have huge implications. It could affect the entire economy of a country. And as Amy points out, most of them underestimated the budget. In fact, all of these cases, they underestimated their budget, okay? And Curtis is highlighting some of these magnitudes are all in a day's work of NASA. And of course, you're right. Mega projects are around us. NASA is an example, but they're becoming more and more common. The Olympics is one area that we like to talk about because there's a rich history there of track record that I can talk about. But mega projects and projects of this scale and with somewhat catastrophic outcomes are all around us. And actually, they're becoming more and more popular. Let's see some more examples, okay? So for instance, Airbus and Boeing both had recent developments of new aircraft that ended up far exceeding the original budget stated, always had suffered from tremendous amount of delay, and even when aircraft was delivered to a client, there were implications around the scope. The quality was not quite where they had wanted it to be, and there were issues with the airplanes that had to cause them to stop delivery. The Joint Fighter Striker is one of the biggest high-profile projects of the past decade for sure, that has run into billions and billions of dollars and has been delayed numerous times, and we don't even know when it's going to be completed. Fast trains in China and in Japan. This is just an example to show you that projects of this scale relative to the environment have been in existence for a long time. Starting from the pyramids and through history, we can point to projects that really touched upon so many people's lives and had such an effect on the current climate in a country. And this is kind of where I'm headed with this talk, to talk about these large-scale projects, these mega projects that are impactful in so many different ways. Okay? And I hear here already some, I see your chat, and I know that it's very tempting, and we'll get there, to say, you know, why is this happening? What is the cause? Okay? Why are these projects, these big projects that have such huge implications, suffering so badly on the performance side? Let me give you a couple more examples, and then we'll see if we can have a dialogue going. So another example here, is, for instance, as we said, all of NASA projects or projects in space, space stations, and anything to do in that sphere, in that scale, is going to end up being a mega project. Another example is the whole new transportation hub in the site that was the World Trade Center. That is another project that is costing billions of dollars and is taking multiple years. It's already suffered from numerous delays, and we don't really know what the final outcome will be in terms of quality, and let alone in terms of revenue. So another thing to notice is not these projects suffer from delays, they suffer from cost overruns, and in many different cases, they also overpromise in terms of performance. The Channel Tunnel between England and France is a classic example. If they knew now, if they knew then what they know now, if they knew at the time of approval how much it would actually cost and what kind of revenue they would see from that Channel Tunnel, they would have not approved that project. And so projects tend to underperform in the sense that they overpromised huge benefits and they don't really live up to those. Okay. And one thing that I see the conversation evolving into is the fact that projects are unique. By definition, Jim, thank you for pointing that out, projects are unique. We don't always know when we estimate how long they're going to take or what the costs are going to be or even what the deliverable is, since it's the first time that we're engaged in that project. Okay. So that's going to give us some issue, a struggle with dealing with correction. How do we correct for all of these issues, and how do we cope with mega projects in a better way? But let's take it step by step. So first I want to coin something, and some of you know this from my class, and if not, then I think that you'll appreciate this term, to say that all of this has a name. This phenomena of projects over-promising and under-delivering, or the fact that they cost more, they take longer, and they don't perform up to spec, is called the planning fallacy. This is something that has been coined by psychologists, and it has kind of entered into the realm of project managers to say that we as planners, whether we're planning individual projects for ourselves or we're planning projects at a mega project level, we will suffer from the planning fallacy, and we can think of reasons why, okay? Now, the reason to do that is to say if we understand that there's a phenomena out there and we think of why it happens, maybe we can think of solutions and ways to solve it, okay? So first we need to understand that this is a problem that we suffer from for many different reasons, okay? Let's hear some reasons. Why do you think that we suffer from the planning fallacy? I hear a voice. Talk to us. I hear the static. I wish somebody would say something.
Because it's difficult. It's not easy to plan a project because they're new.
Okay, so who was just talking? Introduce yourself.
It's Ryan Rayborn.
Ryan, at least we have one person. That's great. Thank you. We may have to use you as the, as representing the students every single time. So Ryan, you're saying it's hard, right? You're saying, so explain again your reasoning for why we suffer from it.
No, yeah, exactly. I think it's as simple as that. It's a hard thing to do, right? You never think of there's kind of the adage, you don't know what you don't know, right? And since typically projects are something that are new, you don't know what you don't know, and so you're not able to estimate for what could potentially go wrong.
Okay, so there is something around the fact that it's new. We don't really know what we don't know, like you say, or there's a lot of uncertainty, so we struggle with our estimation. That's true, but that's true for a lot of other things. That's shared for new ventures, or that's common for new businesses that we purchase or innovate, startups. So why is it that projects especially suffer from this? So I'm going to read off of the chat a little bit. Technology risk. So there's a lot of risk related to new technologies, that there's a lot of uncertainty related to what Ryan said, not only the fact that it's new, but the fact that it's complicated, or that it has to do with a lot of moving parts, okay?
I suspect that another reason is that people who do the estimates use similar projects or something that they borrow from that has benefited from some learning curve, and they don't build in the fact that people are coming together. There's a lot of wasted time in terms of people learning how to communicate effectively with one another. And so there's that, we'll call it the human inefficiency element.
Right. So people sometimes, and thank you, Rick, for that. There's a lot of organizational complexities just with the fact that we're going to interact with each other, and we don't always take that into account when we're planning. We think that transitions will be smooth. We think that we'll just hand things from one to the next, and it's not always clear that, or we know that in reality that rarely actually happens, okay? We see that big projects are complex, and our brains can't deal with that scale. Peter, that's a good point. I also see here some comments around the project owner try to go low deliberately, or some folks try to maybe somebody trying to get a project approved. They sometimes put in budgets and put in timelines that they can't realistically meet, either consciously or subconsciously, or they do it deliberately or not, due to approval processes. And then they're faced with a project that will never stand a chance of meeting those stated targets. Okay, so that's clearly a reason, and that relates to what Alan is saying, that this has to do with political. Okay, that it's all political. You want to get through the door. I call this the Olympic effect. I want my city to win the bid, although some cities are resisting these days, and so I go and I submit a bid that is not realistic. Okay, these are all very good reasons, and we can unpack them even further. But let's focus specifically on the topic of the day, which is mega projects. Okay, and so I want us to get to a place where we can define and clearly understand what mega projects are. So let's hear again from the example that I gave and from your kind of experience. What is a mega project versus just a regular project? Anybody who has their mic on can chime in, and you guys, so high complexity, Curtis is saying. So a mega project, say that again?
Anything over $1 billion.
Anything over $1 billion. That's a great definition, and we will go with that definition. Multi-year and multi-million dollars. So, and even more, Rick is saying $1 billion. True. So multi-year, highly complex. Complexity that Curtis mentions is important. Complexity has to do with things like the systems. How many systems are interacting? Complexity could do with just a number of contracts that we issue. Capital-intensive projects, so again, over $1 billion. Other dimensions related to mega projects, very large relative to past efforts that are poor predictors of the scope. Right, so Martin is right in the sense that mega projects are typically ones that break ground, that are really innovative and are going to be very different from the past historical projects. Amy says, new technology, never done. These are great, and very often it may involve, as Amy says, the public sector funding. And this is, of course, a very important part of these mega projects. Bob hits on a huge one, multiple stakeholders. So we are going to talk about projects that have so many people engaged and so many stakeholders that have their perspective and their motivations for being involved, that is going to add a lot of complexity to how we think about mega projects. So let me bring up a list here, more formal, but it picks up exactly on the list that you guys mentioned. We're talking about very large-scale projects, complex, uncertainty with a lot of ambiguity in there, long. Typically, we talk about 10 years, although I know that we don't necessarily always mega projects are not always 10 years. Olympics, for instance, typically get planned over 7 to 8 years by the time the approval and the chosen city is allowed to start working. So we're going to talk about multiple years, maybe more than 3 or 4, and we don't necessarily need the 10-year restriction. It's going to cost us over $1 billion, okay, at least in terms of the plan. It's going to involve multiple private and public stakeholders, and it's going to impact, at the end of the day, millions of people. Okay. Some definitions might be helpful here, so I put these as kind of notes at the bottom. That mega projects are usually measured in billions, as we discussed, major projects in hundreds of millions, and just your run-of-the-mill project in millions or tens of millions of dollars. And mega projects, sometimes people like to think about them as major programs because we're talking about multiple components that maybe could be framed as an individual project coming together and creating a program. Okay, so with that definition in mind, I wanted to introduce this notion of the mega projects paradox. Over the years, as we as society progress and are really unlimited in terms of our reach, we go to space, we go around the globe, the number of mega projects that get planned and executed on increases. Okay, these projects get bigger and bigger. If you recall, even the Olympics, which is fairly standard, the budget over the time has increased substantially. So projects get bigger, there are more of them, to the point where we can now talk about the fact that the global spending on mega projects is somewhere around 8% of global GDP. Specifically in infrastructure, you may it's easier to think of these types of projects in infrastructure because they're so visible to us. So highways and bridges and tunnels. Most cities have their local disaster around a project that hasn't yet opened. I know Seattle has tunnel issues. LA, DC is still struggling with some of its public transportation issues. And so every city has their infrastructure story to tell. And these projects are assessed to be spending around $3.4 trillion, which is about 4% of global GDP. And the performance is really poor. It's poorer than ever. The performance and the track record is not good. This has huge implications. Think about the situation that Greece is in today and how some of that could have emerged already during the time of the Olympics. Think about the implications for some states in the U.S., if you're local, around what happens when these projects are costing the taxpayer billions and billions of dollars. This is a real societal impact, and we have to kind of start to think about that, not only on a performance level, not only on a slightly, sarcastic level. I know that we like to be skeptical of anything that is coming from federal, but also on an individual level. This has real implications for how we view the world and how we believe in our capability as society, and there's things that we can do to improve that situation. Okay, so here are some more numbers. I don't know how well you can see that screen. I know that there are some questions. Jason has one. We're going to come back to some questions towards the end to tie it all in. So bear with me. I hope I'll have a chance to kind of discuss exact examples. But this is just to show just how bad things are, okay? So what you see here in this table, and again, I hope you can see this, and if not, I'll share it around after the presentation. You can see here a list of overruns. So this is all cost overruns in this case, not delays, but cost overruns. And you can see some examples like the Opera House in Sydney, 1,400% overrun. You can see here examples like, I think there is down this list, the Channel Tunnel, which I said 80% overrun, and so on and so forth. 1 in every 10 mega projects is within budget. 1 within every 10 mega projects is on schedule. 1 delivers on the benefits that it provides, and therefore if you put all of this together, you realize that the chance of a success, and again, success is defined here in the project management setting as on time, on budget, and delivers the scope. The chance of the success is slim. Okay, so this might be the point where we can start talking about what do all of these projects have in common, and then maybe we can start saying, okay, how do we solve this? Okay, so I first want to point out a few more things that have to do with what do they have in common, and then we're going to talk about what can we do to fix it. And I see here another great question around, are there private initiatives in this list? There are studies, there are plenty of studies that also look at private initiatives, not only public and private or pure public kind of projects. Some of those are mega projects, although less common. And there are records, especially around, for instance, IT projects, ERP systems, and large-scale computer projects that do end up running over budget, running late in the same fashion, regardless of whether they're private or public. And the Boeing and the Airbus examples are good for that. Okay, so what do these mega projects have in common? First, they're multi-party, as we said. They're multi-year, And as you all kind of picked up on it, forecasting can be hard. It can be hard because we lack experience. And I think we've mentioned all of this, typical of a Darden classroom. You guys are all kind of attuned to these points. People use the wrong models. They plan with optimism, and they are kind of subject to the planning fallacy. And they manipulate the cost and the benefits. They're high profile, which means that it's also very hard to abandon. The sunk cost fallacy here really kicks in. These are projects and commitments that people have made, high profile, typically political bodies, or just even private engagements. Companies have stated launch dates and release dates, and they really struggle to back off from that. And so it's hard for us to abandon such a mega project, even though it's so catastrophic to continue and to run it to the extreme of its budget and to drag it on over these years. So how do we stand a chance to correct it? How do we stand a chance to overcome some of these issues? I want to start hearing from you what you think we can do here to try and help correct or find a way, and what the tools are. I'm going to talk a little bit about them, but let's hear from you what you think we can do to come up with a better way to deal with mega projects of this size and this scale. So Rick, I know your microphone is working great, so I see that you posted a comment, which is very helpful. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about both your comment there and also what you think we could do in order to correct moving forward.
Well, an analogy that comes to mind is, in fact, the Olympic Games, and usually the basketball teams that we put together that are a bunch of all-stars, but they haven't played together. Okay, and so sometimes they don't perform that well, and my point is it's helpful if you assemble the team early and actually maybe even go through some, we'll call it practice runs, small projects, because having worked on large projects, it's not only having the people being able to get along with one another, but the bigger issue is how do you resolve quickly the unexpected? And that's when sometimes projects get delayed for a long time.
Let's see, I want to see if I can write. Will it let me write? It won't let me write on my screen now. Okay, I wanted to keep kind of write and keep track of your ideas, because I think that that's a great point to say, well, we can do these practice runs of these teams. These teams come together. That analogy to basketball is great. It will be hard for us to kind of expect everybody to work, talking about those people problems that we talked about up front, if we don't have a runway or we don't have some experience. So put them in the teams together, let them work together for a while, and then introduce this mega project. Shared objectives. So John is suggesting shared objectives that might be picked up on this principal-agent tension. It's really hard to have shared objectives. It would be good if we can get there. And maybe thinking more carefully and consciously about what those objectives are would help us align the stakeholders in advance, okay? These objectives can be really hard to zoom into, and we need to think about what is driving each one of the players related to the project. I hear somebody else chiming in there. Go ahead.
Hi, this is TJ and Jason. One thing that Kahneman speaks about a number of times is doing pre-mortems, and so kind of trying to get around the cognitive biases by thinking about actively what could go wrong, and then understanding how that might change your plans or how you go about them.
Fantastic. How do you think that? So how would you do that? That idea of a pre-mortem is a great idea. What would you do? And think about Darden Classroom. Do you have any tools to do like a pre-mortem like that?
So, I mean, when you think about the stakeholder theory, you could kind of run through each of your stakeholders, understand, someone mentioned shared objectives and how difficult that is. Think about the main things that are driving each of your stakeholders and understand how they might conflict and how they then might drive the cost or time up.
Okay, fantastic. So think about all your stakeholders. Thinking about maybe do some scenario analysis, TJ. That's what you're describing. Think about how they're going to react. There are stakeholder frameworks that actually allow you to go through that process more formally. To say to yourself, what is the resistance that this stakeholder group is going to experience and face, And how will I already put in place some mitigation plan to anticipate that resistance that is coming down from that stakeholder? So that's a great way to think about it. I see here some other suggestions. So Curtis, you're saying some risk analysis. Fantastic. In the context of Darden Classroom, does anybody recall how we do risk analysis? People are typing. I can hear you typing. So how do we do risk analysis at Darden? What equipment do we have, or what kind of capability do we have on board? Crystal ball. Thank you, Amy. Yes. So as some students know, and Missy's chiming in from a recent class, we teach that here at Darden, how to do this in the context of project management. We can run simulations. We can run pretty rigorous simulations, and you would be surprised to know that in the world of mega projects, and actually in the just sphere of project management in general, risk analysis is not as commonly used as we would like it to be. It is actually not best practice formally in many companies, and even in many formal government bids. And proposals go in with no real risk assessment or rigorous risk assessment, and demonstrating some capabilities around the chances of meeting budgets and deadlines. I was involved a few years ago in a project with Dunlop, who do tires and brake systems for airplanes, and they were bidding to actually be part of the Boeing project for the 787. And we pitched in a component of the bid that all it did was a risk analysis. All it did was Monte Carlo simulation that you all know from Crystal Ball and At Risk. And they said that they were the only, or they got feedback from Boeing that they were the only bidder to submit such a rigorous risk analysis. And actually, they didn't even get the bid. They didn't win the bid because they were being a little bit too conservative, or they were showing some real concern around meeting the deadlines, and so they were glossed over and the bid was given to a different company. And so there's a lot that we can do with the tools. I see here some ideas around using decision trees and extended decision trees, and really having more rigorous capabilities in project management. So bringing in some tools from outside into project management can help us a great deal. Scenario analysis that TJ mentioned, risk analysis is one. There are other things that we can do, okay? There are other ideas that we can suggest that will allow us to overcome some of these problems, okay? Let's think. So Martin is saying, new approval of money and how it's spent, so overruns are, and where they're occurred. That is exactly right. So encouraging public transparency, keeping track, okay, keeping track of historical trends and actuals is notoriously problematic. You would be surprised how few companies actually keep track of their original pitch budget and plan in terms of the time, and then look at the actuals. I've collected some data, but I know that it is rare. And even government bodies that are somewhat required to do this don't always do this properly. And so it's hard to keep track of exactly how well performance is, and so you won't stand a chance to correct it. Someone else is trying to chime in there. I'm pausing deliberately to see if somebody wanted to unmute their mic and chime in there. Sherry, meanwhile, types provide attractive financial incentives for achieving the goal, so making sure that everybody's aligned. Using local partners who are more familiar with the resources. So this suggestion relates to Rick's idea of having a team that works together really well and having them overcome some of their challenges in interacting with each other. That's great. We'll see what Paul suggests. Have uninvolved parties track program status. So having external parties track the status might give a different perspective from the outside. And that's an interesting suggestion. Very often I hear the idea that whoever is pitching the project should not necessarily be the project manager in reality, or that there should be some kind of separation between approval and execution, which will also kind of follow Paul's suggestion of having some kind of uninvolved party from the outside intervene. This also brings into mind another way that we can solve some of these problems in the estimation process itself. And how can we use other parties in the estimation itself? Well, one big idea that has been really catching up is this notion of the wisdom of the crowd, the idea of bringing in other opinions and having more folks chime in to the estimation process in a way that allows us to get a more diverse set of opinions to improve the way that we forecast. And so I think that, and Rick is saying, I agree with Paul's comment, if it's a public sector contract, let me make a suggestion that we can have this multiple party participation in the estimation process and in the execution and in the tracking for private and for public companies. They can be uninvolved parties internally, and they can be uninvolved parties from the public, depending on the setting. So in the rest of my slide deck, I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit just to get to some of these comments. I will share these slides with you, and one thing that I have on this is a list of specific risks that are typically talked about in mega projects. One of them, for instance, has to do with political and legal risks. Multiple years have a lot of effect on the evolution of a project. They see different political figures, transition in key areas that have an effect on mega projects. Economy changes, and there is instability in terms of the economy, and so on and so forth, that have to be taken into account when we plan mega projects. Other extreme events like war or weather or terrorism, sadly these days, have to be taken into account as we think about projects. And again, I just want to get to these slides or these recommendations that you made, and here are a few of the solutions. So you mentioned quite a few of them. I'm going to summarize. You mentioned the Monte Carlo simulation. We talked about wisdom of crowds. I've been hearing a lot about companies that use prediction markets both internally and externally to improve their predictions. Really have your employees, even at Google or at some private company, they've had their employees predict completion of tasks, complete prediction of projects, or predict completion of projects, predict cost of projects. So really have them play with each other, some kind of predictive, have a market that they gamble or they win something in order to improve the prediction that they come up with and to utilize that crowd internally. I want to kind of go back and talk about the outside view. The outside view is one that has been suggested by Kahneman specifically to target the planning fallacy, which is to do a lot of statistical analysis. If we get to a point where we collect a lot of data, if we get to a point where we can track actuals and initial plans, we can use the historical data to talk about accuracy, and we can correct. What's so interesting with that idea is that it's related to my last bullet point related to governance. More and more countries are aware of the fact that something has to change. In England, quite a few years ago, in 2003, the Treasury has officially changed their guidelines for how projects get approved. And they have a whole supplement to their guideline that addresses all of their departments underneath them that has to do with how to cope with the planning fallacy and optimism bias. They have a process in place for full transparency and corrective uplifts that have to be applied in order to adjust budgets to be more realistic, in order to adjust timelines to be more realistic. And the accountability increases because they keep track of what is going on, and they keep track of by how much those overruns decrease over time. Some of you may know that things are changing here in the U.S. too. I don't know where it's going to end up, but as of now, there has been an initiative that has been very recently approved, and I'm not sure if you guys can see my screen, but you can follow this link in my presentation that talks about the project management bill, which is, it's now just been approved by Senate not that long ago, maybe a couple weeks ago, and it is now waiting for final approval, in which Obama and the government are trying to improve throughout the government how projects are being planned and executed, and really raise the level of accountability, so we can't just brush away any project. Thank you very much, Peter, for posting that link, and I see that Jill posted some other links that are useful here that pick up on examples of where these ideas have been implemented. And so this recent initiative talks about, or as far as I can interpret it, it really relates to accountability. If we raise awareness that there are methods out there, there are processes that we can follow, there is a need to improve because the results can be catastrophic, we can improve the way that we think, and we can make sure that projects start or get planned better and get run better with a higher degree of accountability. Private and public partnerships also help, and that's I'm kind of going in reverse order on my slide deck. The first bullet there around private and public partnerships are done and mainly in place in order to encourage some alignment of objectives, in order to really kind of, again, bring in multiple parties, but help them focus on their goal and not have conflicting objectives pulling us in different directions. That's really it for my talk. I hope you've learned. An hour goes by really quickly when you're either eating lunch or talking on camera. And I wish we had more time together. An 85-minute class upstairs at Darden seems like a good thing for all of us to get together and do. I will leave you with a couple of, just so you know what's going on at Darden, some snippets of information about activity here at Darden, so you know for yourself, and you can talk about it, or you can reach out to me and we can talk about it more. So I am working with the students, current first years. We're going to Japan on one of our, they used to be called GBEs maybe while you were at Darden. Now they're called Darden Worldwide Courses. And we're going to Japan on a course to focus really on project management. It's kind of a trip that follows the Olympics. So I went to Brazil for a couple of years, but I'm taking a group of, right now there's 36, there may be a few more who are coming with me to Kyoto and Tokyo. And we're really going to be focusing on the specifics of what it means to run projects in Japan, how the culture affects it, some specific projects that are related to situations that they found themselves in Japan. And I'm excited. This would be a fascinating trip. It's the first one for me, so I look forward to writing out to all of you and telling you what we've learned. And also, if you didn't know, I offer 2-day courses in Washington, D.C. If you know of any companies that are interested or folks that need some help in this area, I love interacting with companies and getting to know their challenges. There's a lot more to it than just what we talked about today. But if you know of folks who want to talk to somebody in academia, I would be glad for you to point them to us or me to them. And that's about it. We may have time, Jen, for a couple of questions. Do you have time for, I think we have like 5 minutes for a question or two. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. We've got 5 or 6 more minutes. If people want to type in any other questions or unmute themselves and ask, go right ahead.
Quick question regarding private projects, and that is years ago I found that there had to be a very clear organizational structure, as in, the more people you bring into the decision process, the slower things got. And so, can you reflect a little bit on sort of the size of the decision makers and some of the organizational aspects? And frankly, large projects do not lend themselves well to pure democracies. I'm thinking more like an Arnold Schwarzkopf during Operation Desert Storm. So I was wondering if you could reflect a little bit on that.
Yeah, so I'll talk about a couple of things that hopefully relate to what you're describing. So on one level, the world is going smaller. So from all I can tell in project management, the really current theme is go smaller. Actually, spend time dividing things up, going agile, what we say, right? So spend some time chunking your project in much smaller components, divvying it up, and setting dedicated teams to work independently on a project, on a relationship with a client. And so actually in the world of project management, both the task, the duration, and the team is going way smaller. Companies like Capital One are working in teams of 10 people maybe in 2-week sprints. So they have to report out and achieve certain deliverables in 2 weeks. So that's one phenomena that is going on in the world, giving more autonomy. I think it goes hand in hand with everything we hear about millennials and so on, but just giving a lot more independence to individual teams as opposed to a very hierarchical structure. On the other hand, mega projects, as you say, don't always lend themselves to a lot of autonomy. Okay, so we have a contradiction here. You can't really build an airport or develop the Olympics if you allow teams to work very independently. And so there are some compromises or hybrid models that are being proposed. One thing, for instance, in the healthcare.gov project, that was not, that's not an example of a well-executed project because, of course, when the website launched, it was a disaster. But eventually, what actually put things back on track and got that website up to where it should have been was an agile team or an agile mindset, meaning a lot more basically dividing your organization into many different teams, giving them autonomy where they can have autonomy, and having the coordination done by few individuals behind the scene. So coming up with creative structures that don't feel as if it's so staged or such a clear, long, bureaucratical process will probably improve your chances of success and improve your chances of quick progression. The benefit of having smaller teams work on smaller objectives is also that you can get the client involved, and then the different representations of the customer or the client can come in much sooner. And so we see that happening even in large-scale projects like the mega projects, but in very creative ways. So Rick, I hope that addressed some of your questions, but that's kind of the inspiration for me. I think that that's where things are going, even in the mega project world. And Curtis is adding to that. Yeah, rapid prototyping is in similar vein. How do we kind of speed up the process by delivering smaller components quicker to the customer? I'll segue. Amy had a question. Oh, sorry, Chuck, you're asking there a question around PMP certification. I did not cover it, so I'm not going to ignore you. In general, I think it's a good certification to get. It's the biggest, it's the most popular and the most accepted and known out there in the world. A lot of, if you're working with the government or if you're working in contracting in the U.S., it's definitely a must-have in many circumstances. My sense is that with this new program management bill, that is, if it passes and if it gets sorted the way that I think it will, the PMP will become even more meaningful. And so it's definitely worth obtaining if you're very close to it. And most of you have experience in working on projects. You're probably ticking many of the boxes already that are required. You just have to sit down and take an exam, which isn't pleasant, but it's not hard either to do. Other questions, anyone? I feel like we're at the last minute of our time. I wanted to really thank you all for joining and sticking with me for so long. There's still quite a few of you online. I typically get humbled by our classroom, and this is not this is just another experience that shows me how rewarding it is to engage with a great group of folks who are interested in the topic. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions and for participating. I will share the slide deck with you because we didn't have time to go through all of it really, but if you're interested, I have lots more material. There are books that were written just about mega projects. There are articles that are getting published every day. This is a hot area in terms of academia, and so I encourage you to reach out and to learn more. Thank you. I miss some of you all. Come back to Charlottesville and knock on my door when you're in town. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yael. We appreciate your time and expertise. Also, just want to thank the alums who participated in today's webinar. You all get great grades from us. We hope you'll join us for our next session, which will be led by adjunct faculty member and Darden alumnus from the class of '67, George Barbie. And that will be titled Advancing an Innovative and Global Culture, which will take place on Thursday, January 12th at noon. So you can register for those and view past webinars on the alumni website. Thank you all again so much, and happy holidays.
Cheers.
Thank you, everybody. Happy holidays.